went to college at Haverford College near here, graduated in 1973, and went straight from there to law school at Yale, graduated in 1976. By the time I graduated from Yale Law School, I had some sense of where I would end up and what I'd be doing, and it was not public interest work at that point. In fact, for the next 18 years, I was in private practice, mostly doing corporate law and corporate litigation here in Wilmington. And I suppose you could say that ACLU-related work was a side enterprise. Well, I had been, I guess, a fairly consistent financial contributor in the years between 1976 and 1985. But that was the extent of my own personal initiative. To join the board, that was the result of having been contacted, I believe, by Drew Fennell. Now, whether that was her idea or not, I'm not sure. I'm guessing that it was the idea of whoever was monitoring contributions. So I don't know what conversation occurred, but Judy was the messenger at the very least, and she told me about joining the board, and I agreed to it very happily and quickly. The way the organization was structured at the time was very much focused and dependent on volunteer activity. So as one of the lawyers on the board, it was pretty natural for others and me also to think that what would make sense for me to do would be to serve on then called and may still be called the Legal Review Committee, which was a committee of volunteers who would review potential litigation to be brought by ACLU Delaware and make recommendations to the board about what litigation to take on and what not to. So that's one thing I fell into pretty readily. Other than that, yeah, I think it was mostly just a matter of attending board meetings and being aware of stewardship responsibilities, contributing to both financially and in terms of planning to the Candler Dinner, which was our major fundraising event at that time. I think I succeeded Max Bell as president. And, you know, I wish I could remember how it came about. I don't think Max had anything like a veto or selection power over it. And I'm pretty sure it was a matter of consensus. I sure don't remember lobbying for it. But when it came up, I was happy to do the service. As you probably know, I did it for 7 years, and I've come to believe that that's way too long for anybody to be president. I'm not sure where things stand today, but I think having some more turnover, faster turnover was probably better. But Max had been president for, I think, quite a bit longer even than I had. Let's take the matter of legislation and the Delaware General Assembly first. I'm not sure it was me, but I certainly noticed, and I think others did too, that the practice we had of longstanding of identifying legislation that we wanted to oppose or occasionally support, and then having somebody write a letter to legislators was well and good, but way short of effective legislative lobbying. And I can't remember when I realized that or when I decided to try to work with others to do something about it, but that was one change in the environment that prompted a very different approach by the time my tenure as president was over as compared to when it started. we had that letter writing approach, and it evolved into a much more active, engaged form of legislative influence in terms of appearances in Dover and committees, testifying, meeting privately with legislators, to the point that Drew Fennell, as executive director, ultimately became a registered lobbyist. So a very different approach to lobbying than was there when I became president. And litigation was done in a different way, and that has evolved over time. The practice of having a legal review committee go to the board with a proposed lawsuit, and the board approves it, and then someone goes out and finds a volunteer lawyer to take it on. That kind of system, which was there when I became president, gave way to a much more professional approach, where there ultimately was a staff attorney who might be assisted by or farm things out to volunteer attorneys, but was there on the job, at least part-time and eventually full-time. And the legal review committee became less dominant in terms of identifying cases to work on, and much more of an advisory kind of group than it was when I took on the presidency. And the other change that may have accounted for a lot of this evolution was the matter of money. When I became president, I'm pretty sure that the Candler dinner was still ACLU Delaware's major source of income. And that the amount of that income, at least when I last checked into it, was pretty stable over the years, which is a good thing, but also a limiting thing. What was not stable was funding from the national organization, which mushroomed, thankfully, from 1985 until the time when I stepped down as president, to the point where it was able to fund not only an executive director's compensation, but also a staff attorney and other forms of administrative assistance. So I think it's important for people to recognize the mutual dependence of the affiliates like ACLU Delaware on the national organization, and vice versa. I felt that over time, instead of being kind of an isolated organization of volunteer workers, ACLU Delaware became a cog, an important cog, but a cooperating partner with the national organization in doing civil liberties work. And that change, I think, accounted for a lot of what I might call the professionalization of the organization over the period in which I was president and continuing after that. When Judy Mellon was stepping down as executive director, and I believe this was during my term as president, can't recall that separately, but I think that's right. We recognized that we would need to replace Judy. We recognized that we would need to conduct a search. We recognized that the national organization had resources and guidelines about how to do that. It was advertised nationally among ACLU affiliates, as well as locally through word of mouth and probably other ways I can't recall. We got a number of applications. I remember being in the group that was reviewing applications, a search committee, I guess it was. And I was pleased to see that Drew was one of the applicants. We also got applicants from outside Delaware of some considerable caliber. But Drew, I knew of as a lawyer. I think she had been at Young Conaway law firm there. And I believe that she had done some work for ACLU Delaware before. And what I remember from the deliberation, the process of deliberating about hiring a new executive director was the sense that Drew was dedicated, really impassioned about civil liberties issues, and a lawyer. And on top of that, a lawyer who was well connected with the Delaware legal community. And with no disrespect intended to the other good applicants we got, I think I felt, and others in the search committee felt, it was not a hard decision. And we were sure proven correct. I've always felt that of all the achievements, such as they might have been, that occurred when I was president of ACLU Delaware, hiring Drew Fennell was top among them. Of all the things aside from hiring Drew that I have a recollection of, that's the clearest. And all due humility aside, it's the accomplishment I'm proudest of. But I didn't initiate it. The national organization had what I think was then called a Gay Rights Project. And there was a gentleman named Matthew Cole who was the head of that project. And near as I could tell, his job was going around the country promoting what he wryly described as a homosexual agenda, which was usually used in a derogatory way, but he sort of co-opted it proudly. And I remember him being really, really insightful and strategically thoughtful. He had mapped out, in fact, an agenda of ways in which progress could be made on civil liberties issues from the standpoint of LGB folks. And I'll explain maybe later why I'm not using the TEQ, but LGB folks. And I remember distinctly that item 1 on the agenda was hate crime legislation, that the easiest thing to do to advance acceptance of LGB rights would be to promote hate crime legislation, because who supports crime, right? And that, in fact, was the first legislative initiative that we took once we took on this LGBT rights project. But I remember being part of a group that put together an organizing event for the ACLU Delaware LGBT project. And as I remember it, it was in one of the rooms at the restaurant rooms at the Hotel DuPont. And there were a lot of people there. And I remember making a speech that introduced Matt Cole, who went on to actually talk about the nuts and bolts. But I remember making the point that in a sort of satirical way that I sure hoped nobody would discriminate against me because I'm heterosexual. And honest, I didn't choose to be heterosexual. And it would be really wrong if, I mean, I can't do anything about it, I don't think. And it'd be really wrong if I were going to be punished and discriminated against for that reason. So, but I might as well come out, yes, I'm a heterosexual. And the whole point of that was to acknowledge and promote with other people the idea that, it's not a choice, it's who we are. And we got to get over the idea that there's something sinful about it, that we ought to address through public discrimination. It ended. And that was the note on which the whole campaign started. And the hate crime legislation, sure enough, did pass. And then Matt Cole's blueprint that he outlined for us had, I think, domestic partnership after that. And basically, it was his vision of how to crack the wall apart. And it ended, of course, with marriage. I should say it ended. The LGBT part ended with marriage. But the other step on the road was one I won't take credit for, but I will give credit to Eric Klinger-Walensky, who was a board member I think in the early 2000s, who at a board meeting when we were talking about the issue pointed out that we were really not doing complete work here, that it wasn't just LGBT, it was LGBT, and transgender rights were something that we had failed to address. And of course, that changed over time as well. But to sum up, of all the things I've watched over with ACLU Delaware, the progress that we've made in the state of Delaware on LGBTQ issues in the last 20 years has been, cosmic movement in microcosmic time, and just huge culture change. And I'm very proud to have been part of that and very honored to have witnessed it happen. My position at Widener Delaware Law School helped draw in some talent into the organization, like Alan Garfield, for example, who later, I think, became president and was a longtime board member and a First Amendment expert. I think I had something to do with getting him involved. And I can't recall, but I think my term on the national board followed my term as president of the Delaware affiliate. And that was a tempestuous period, more about national than about Delaware, but that was the subject of multiple board meetings in Delaware. If I remember correctly, Anthony Romero's term as executive director of the national organization began, like Drew Fennell's, right around the time of 9/11. And it was like being thrown into a fire drill for him. It resulted in some ways in a much stronger organization because the threats to civil liberties at the national level were severe enough that fundraising became, I don't want to say easy, but much more successful. And Anthony was a strong leader. He also had very outspoken opposition on the national board, to the point that it really made board meetings at the national level unpleasant and highly contentious. Because of my work in corporate law, I think I was appointed to chair a committee on the rights and responsibilities of national board members. And we prepared a report that was, let's just say, not well received by the dissenters, the anti-Anthony folks on the board. And the result was, again, a great deal of infighting at the national board level. It eventually subsided before I stepped down from the national board, but it led to quite a few sleepless nights on my part.